I have a whole bunch of Flying Geese blocks that I need to trim for my next quilt, and I thought this would be a good chance to show you how I do my trimming. So obviously when we sew them, our blocks aren't perfect. They're a little bit wonky looking, and especially something like Flying Geese, because they are cut and sewn on a bias, this can get a little bit stretchy for you, and it just ends up looking a little wonky. It's also not going to be the perfect size of what you need. They're usually a tiny bit larger. And so you don't want to take two of these and sew them together because they're not going to be the right size. They're not going to be squared and they won't go together very well. So I'm going to show you how to take this and turn it into the perfectly squared, perfect size quilt block. And that way you can have a bunch of these to put together and they'll go together perfectly. So let's start off first with the right size ruler. So I need my final Flying Geese block to be 5.5 wide by 3 inches tall. So I don't want to work with a ruler that is gigantic. I don't want something that's like 12 inches. I also can't use something that's smaller, like a 4-inch ruler. So I like to use something kind of like this, like 6, 6.5, maybe a 9 at the largest. And I'm going to start with my block pointing towards me. So this point is headed towards my stomach. And then these are a 45-degree angle right here. So locate the 45-degree line on your ruler and put it there. Now I need these to be 5.5 inches wide. Half of that is 2 3/4. So I'm going to look down this 45-degree line and I'm going to slide this 2 3/4 where it meets here at a point. I'm going to slide that into the point of my Flying Geese, right there in the point. So 2 3/4, it's on a 45-degree line. The very point of my ruler here, the very edge of it, should be right on that seam there. And then I want it to be 5.5. So if I look over here, this 5.5 mark should be right on this seam. And if it's just a hair off, I just kind of split the difference. So you might have to rotate it just a hair. And then that way I'm not perfect here and off by a 1/16 over here. I'm just going to just barely split the difference. And once you have those 3 things checked, then look down here on the bottom. So I need mine to be 3 inches high. And so my 3 inches needs to be within my fabric line. If my 3 inches is down here, I've sewn something wrong and you don't want to cut it because you're not going to get the right size or the right angle. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4 right there. I can check. And then the 5th thing is you want to make sure that you have at least 1/4 of an inch between this point and your 3. Where I'm going to be cutting is a 3. So at least 1/4 of an inch. So you want it to look like this when we're all done, because this 1/4 inch that I have right here is my seam allowance for when I sew it to my next block. So it'll end up looking like this. What we don't want is to not have 1/4 inch there. If I only have 1/8 and then I sew 1/4 inch seam, I'm going to cut off my point there. And we want to keep the points of our blocks. So we're going to first check our 45-degree line, make it a halfway point. We're going to check the corners up in here. We're going to check where we're going to trim next is our 3-inch line. And then lastly, check if you have 1/4 inch there. Then we can hold it down really tight. We're going to cut this side and this side. Now we have perfectly squared edges right here. Then we're going to turn it around so that the point is heading away from us. And remember, I want 5.5 by 3. So I'm going to place my 5.5 here. I'm going to place my 3 along here. And I'm just checking along here that it perfectly matches on the edge. 5.5 by 3. The other thing that I'm going to check, like I could just trim right here. I'm also going to double check that my 2 3/4 is still right there in that point. and that I do have that 1/4 inch there. So those are the few things that I would check when I'm trimming this way, and then hold it down really tight, cut that way. This is going to be really thick where all of this comes together. So if you have a sharp blade, you should be able to get it the first try. If not, you might want to try a second time. And then there's your completely trimmed flying geese. Now, something I explained in my beginners class that we have online is that when you are sewing anything that has a point on it, you want to be sure that you keep that point. So if I was going to sew these 2 blocks together like this, and this is one of the lessons in there, one of the blocks that we cover in our beginner class, you're going to put them right sides together, but don't sew with this one on top because you can't see where your point is. So rather than sew there, flip it over and sew with this one on top, because you can see the seams come together here. You can see your threads, and where they meet together, there's a tiny little X, and you want to make sure that you're sewing down your 1/4 inch line here, and that your needle should just barely kiss the top of that X. So right where those 2 meet, right above that, and then 1/4 inch line here. That way you've sewn on top of your point, and when you open it up, it'll look like this, and you'll be able to keep the points. So there you go. That's how I trim my flying geese blocks. I hope that's helpful. I know we're working on the nebula quilt right now, and I just wanted to be sure that people aren't just grabbing a block and just trimming it 3.5 or 5.5 by 3, and then it's just all wonky and it's not ending up right. So I hope that's helpful, everybody.